So since this is not working, I'm going to unplug this so I can move back. That way we can get closer.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah, what do you want? Let me get my slides out and start the class. Let me quit the email program. That's right, everybody gets a seat, that's true.
Is that annoying?
No, I don't care. I really don't care.
Michael is going to come, but he needs to finish some stuff before, so then, when he's done, he's going to come here next.
Okay. All right, that's very nice of you. Thanks. We're using wireless just because we can't get the thing to work.
Yeah.
Whoa. Oh, jeez. What does that mean? But I can't see my slides, so I don't know what I'm doing. Oh, here it is. There it is. Okay, came back. Okay. Test, week 6. All right. Hey. Someone came in and walked out again. It's 4:31. Okay, let's get started. 4:31. Hey, we all have seats. How about that? Hey, you all look very nice. Back to you. Hello. And we're really grateful to Cesar Hidalgo, professor at MIT Media Lab, sitting right here, who is affiliated with the Kennedy School and is bringing all of us into the building and also connecting his students to this class. We sent out the clarion call of pizza several times, and we hope that brings people here. But Cesar, you want to say a couple words or say hello?
Well, just like to welcome everyone, everyone that is not from here, and the other ones that are from here, thank you for coming.
Yes.
And I'm actually very much looking forward to the class and learn more. I talked with Susan in the past about this project. I think it's kind of like a great idea, and I think that going forward, classes like this that engage the community, actively, are a thing that in the future should be repeated and should be scaled up. That's why I do think that this is an initiative that is important to push forward, and everyone that is here is in a way, pushing forward, and taking the risk of participating on this experiment. So.
Right, it's definitely an experiment, so we're all in this together. So let's start thinking about a call for volunteerism. Actually, wanted to let you all know about this, that Dudley neighborhood, I know many of you are finishing your PAs and extremely busy, but there is a young man there who has come up to the Dudley neighborhood from New Orleans, where he did a lot of surveying work for New Orleans, trying to figure out what assets that community had, physical assets. He's actually interested in encouraging some of you to do some field work in the neighborhood on this kind of instrument. Spend a couple of days. He says in his experience, it's very nice to get away from school briefly and spend a couple of days in the neighborhood looking at physical assets here. And he describes it that he wants to provide the neighborhood with a tool to assess the status of the immediate neighborhood. It could be used for future property acquisition. We all saw what they've been able to do with power of eminent domain in the neighborhood to buy property and use it for affordable housing. Maybe there's another step coming up. So this is a call for help, and he's looking for 4 people. If anybody wants to do this, just let me or Ben know, and we will send you out in the neighborhood. Now, for Cesar, I want to hand you the design briefs that the students have been working on. We have 5 questions, and this is a class on user-centered design. And we always need to be thinking about what the needs of the neighborhood are, not what we're going to do for them, but what problems they're trying to solve. And there's a risk always in coming from graduate school of seeing things in a fishbowl and sort of looking down at the fishbowl instead of being the fish and trying to make the fish happier and meet their own needs. So just a few words about this that we're going to be working very carefully on trying to define what the problem is we're trying to solve and what the fish need. And there are different kinds of tasks in these 5 design questions. Some are quite concrete, build a tool. Some are more abstract. So another purpose of this class and the classes coming up is to have us all share what we're learning about the different kinds of instrumentalities that we're building. So I just want to always bring us back to remembering that this is all about user-centered design. We are going to be sending you out to do interviews this next week, and I'll describe to you how this is going to work. It's going to be very helpful to your teams to actually have a really simple paper prototype of an idea, even though that's farther down the process, because then you have an object to talk about in the interviews that isn't just abstract. So just a tip, try to bring with you a paper prototype. And this interview is this opportunity for the kind of respect and engagement that Panthea Lee talked about when she was here. I'm going to be calling up the people that you interview after you interview them to see how it all went and what you learned from them and what they learned about you as part of this process. And there are several outputs of these interviews that we're looking for. One is a set of archetypes for common templates for the people that you've interviewed so that all the groups can share. This is a very common design process thing. I think I saw a couple nodding heads. You're looking to figure out the sort of characteristics of the people you're talking to, and we're going to try to reference these archetypes for all 5 of the projects, even though each group is interviewing different people. So what do I mean by archetypes? Very specifically, 2 slides for each one of the people that you talk to, one with a picture of that person and then 3 challenges they face. I know this sounds really simplistic, but it's going to help to have a common template for stuff. And the second slide with what the opportunities are for working with this person, how we can help them solve the problems that they've talked to us about. So for each one of the individuals you talk to, we're going to build this library of archetypes that then each group will refer to. Any questions so far? Yeah.
So in terms of interview subject, I would anticipate that there's sort of 2 audiences. There's subject matter experts, and then there's potential users. And within the subject matter experts, they may give us insight on some of the challenges they face or how they interact with their community, but we're there to sort of glean information from them rather than treating them as a user. So are you thinking of this for both or really more for like an end user?
I'm thinking of it for both because the experts, there's also a big monitoring and evaluation part of this, and the experts face challenges for that are going to be very useful as archetypes for every member of the class. So for each person you interview, whether or not they're a substantive expert or a user, these archetypes will be useful. But more discussion of this archetype idea?
Susan,
yeah.
I think it would be good, like especially for the people that have not here in the first time class, maybe that we'll do like a little summary of, I don't know what the heck these archetypes.
All right.
The structure, so it's very hard for me to fit things,
All right. Well, so for people who haven't been here before, what's going on is that the neighborhood has invited us to work on 5 different design projects. And I've got actually paper copies of design projects. Here's actually the design briefs. Yeah, forward, backwards. Everybody here's in the class. Yeah. Oh, hi. Yeah. 4. Okay. Yeah. You have all this in paper. So the challenge here is to take the class, broadly understood, including we're hoping people from MIT to be part of these planning teams, to take these questions, got one? Right, and build a prototype, build something that's going to be really useful for the neighborhood. And they're great, broad questions, like how do we build a technology audit that could be useful around the world? for figuring out what a particular community has in terms of technology access? Is there a way of crowdsourcing that, or does it always have to be done through old-fashioned survey methodologies? That's one big question. Another one is what could the charter school in this neighborhood be using to enrich the relationship between the neighborhood and the school, some platform of communication. Another design challenge is how could the neighborhood visualize and plan its future better? So get another copy of this.
No, actually, you can help them with the hand. He's the head of.
Oh, okay. All right, that's good. Thank you, Cesar. So this is a design class that it has a client who's extremely well organized, and we're now in the stage of figuring out how to get information from the neighborhood that's going to be very useful for designing these new projects, these new challenges. And the thing that's revolutionary here is that the mayor's office is working very closely with us and will fund the best results that come out of the class and implement them, and hoping to franchise them around the world if they're really terrific. So where we are right now in the class is just at the right place for new people to get involved with us, which is why we wanted to come to MIT. We are just at the place of forming groups to think about these design challenges and going out into the field to interview people who have information about their needs and the problems that they face, and then coming back next week with results of those interviews and moving towards prototyping actual new platforms, new designs. I'm sort of speaking to this sector of the room, which includes some people who haven't heard all this before. Do you have any questions so far with where we are? Does that make sense? Anyway? Okay. It's a rich process, and we're sort of just at the beginning. So what I'm asking the students to do for next week is to, in their interviews, go out and talk to different categories of stakeholders in the neighborhood that we're going to introduce them to, and come back with results of those interviews that are substantive about what they've learned, but also try to categorize those people as archetypes. By archetypes, I mean a genre of person, not named with an individual name, but here's a young kid. What are their challenges? What do they face? What could be useful for them in terms of the process and platform that we build? Nigel Jacob just came in the room. He's with the Boston office, Mayor's office of New Urban Mechanics, and he's our client for this course along with the neighborhood, the W neighborhood. Okay, so that's when Nigel, I've just been talking about what we want out of these interviews. We want a template, a standard template for each one of the people that are talked to, with information about what we learned from them on each one of these slides. And I'll post this all up on the website. Okay, more assignments for next week. In addition to interviewing people that we're going to introduce you to, I want each group to think about concrete examples of this thing in the world that already exists. There's got to be hundreds of platforms for schools to communicate with communities, and there must be lots of ways that communities do outreach. Let's come back with some concrete examples for March 6th of all that. Some of the groups have already started doing that. Now, and another important thing we're going to be doing over the next week is figuring out how each one of these design projects could be monitored and evaluated. How will we know if we've designed a tech audit function that's actually successful? We should be building this into the beginning of the project and not just thinking about it at the end. So I want each group to be thinking about this for the next week, right? And I'm going to bring in speakers to talk about monitoring and evaluation also for our next class. All right, so let's make this a little bit more exciting. The groups went out, the ones that already exist, and talked about the questions they would ask to figure out if a tech audit was useful, the proposed tech audit was useful for the neighborhood. So by tech audit, we've got a huge policy challenge around the world. We don't know what technology people are actually using a lot of the time, and yet we're continually trying to design without that fact in place. How do we fill in the gap? This is a big problem. So that this group one, Patrick, Talon, Maria, Luis, Tara, and Jamal, thought about this question of the tech audit and raised a bunch of questions that they'd like to ask to get there. So I've put all these on slides. There are a million of them, and the font is pretty small. So any of you, Patrick or Maria, Talon, Luis, Tara, Jamal, want to introduce yourselves and talk through what you're thinking about here? Right, Patrick?
Sure. First, since the librarian's the first one, I'll just sort of give an overview rather than go through all the questions. The reason we wanted to speak with this person we were thinking is it's one of the local areas that provides technology to those who don't have it in their home.
Yeah.
So people go there to use the internet. So we thought it would be helpful to go and speak with somebody there about what is it that they supply the community and how is it used, and what demands are there for future technology.
Seemed like a reasonable approach initially. Any comments on this one, on the librarian? Is there a way, I want to challenge the whole room here, is there any way you can imagine to crowdsource a tech audit using the kids in the neighborhood? Can you imagine this? Because if we could come up with a system for doing this, it would be revolutionary. It could be implemented around the world. Oh, we didn't. Yes, Laura, what do you think?
We look at the kids who, someone's innovation presentation maybe, who's the kids who map their communities.
Yeah.
And so there is some structure available for that, although this would be a little bit different because I guess we involve more interviews of sorts unless they're actually just looking at the physical places where technology is available.
Mm-hmm.
But that might be like a starting point. That system.
Right. I mean,
Is there an idea to like have kids or less ask their neighbors?
yeah. Why couldn't kids ask their neighbors? How do we make this, an effective way of doing it without making it into the play pump? Sort of effort to turn everybody to child labor, but instead finding a way to do this effectively. Yeah.
Well,
Maria.
I know that we were talking about the charter school design ideas. I mean, actually the charter school isn't in place yet, so maybe this would make sense. But if you could make like surveying and like getting to know your community part of the curriculum, this could be one way to do that.
Well, that's interesting. Build it into the charter school. What are your neighbors using for technology? Just sort of knock on the doors and find out. Yeah. Helen.
I mean, maybe just having wide reach for the kids in the community would be a really good start to at least knowing what's going on with one age group, and they can also speak for their parents or guardians that they know. And you wouldn't be able to generalize it to every age group, but maybe you could, like, if you could get in buy-in from public schools to agree to do a survey. You could have even a sample of kids take that survey.
Yeah.
The response rate, well, all the public school students in this area, whatever percentage use X and their parents use Y or whatever.
Any thoughts about this? Yeah. Or
DSNI already has outreach mechanisms in place. We could tend to think about using those that already exist rather than creating.
just for the like a single-purpose tech audit.
So they already do door knocking in other ways to reach out to communities.
Yeah.
Rather than creating new mechanisms, we think about how to use existing sources like that.
Right, which is always a source of strength, using something that already exists. Now, do you have thoughts about this, the tech audit or the?
For the purpose of the discussion, I think it might be interesting to think about maybe a game that you can develop out of this, right? So that the more kids can get points for each interview that they do, or each different person from different age groups or something. I think there's a lot that you could do to sort of really kind of mobilize energy around this.
Yeah.
I think the challenge is that a tech audit and surveys are boring. So I think the more that we can try to tap into the latent energy of kids and trying to get them to be encouraged to talk to more people and so on, it's interesting.
Yeah, I wanted to find out if there was a way to harness all that energy and point it towards a tech audit in a way that would be replicable in other communities.
One of the interesting phenomena that we're seeing now is that what used to be the digital divide doesn't really exist in the same way. I mean, there certainly are haves and have-nots, but it's no longer simply a line between people that live in Back Bay and people that live in Manhattan. I think we're seeing kids have a lot more technology and their parents less.
Yeah.
So maybe there's something to be there about reporting it on their parents or something.
Right. Yeah.
Did you identify, I don't know what this would be, but identify something that the community wants or desires and have it only accessible by using some technology or that it's used and then track or trace how it is that people would access to it?
That's interesting. Sort of frustrate them and then figure out if that works out. Okay. That's an interesting idea. Yeah, Jamal.
I was thinking maybe a competition, prize for
right.
Whoever has the most responses, and then you have an award. Could be video game. The video game could be the award.
Yeah.
Kids can compete for survey responses.
Right. All right, well, this is a big policy challenge and a big design challenge. How do we do a tech audit? Is there a way to get kids to do it? This group initially has come up with questions they would ask. The first set of questions for the librarian. The second was for the charter school technology director. So what's cool about this neighborhood is not only is it really well organized, but they're launching a brand new charter school for their neighborhood. And the emphasis of the charter school is going to be training teachers. And they're starting off with kindergarten and first grade, but it's going to eventually be an entire elementary school. And so the second set of questions then went to the tech director for the charter school. What kinds of technology do you plan to introduce in the school? So what was your thinking here, Group 1, about this set of questions? Patrick?
There are a number of different folks on that list that so there are two questions there for the charter school, just sort of understanding what they were planning on implementing that we might be able to leverage. Like you guys were discussing before, if it's something that it could be implemented into the curriculum, that'd be huge. But other folks, we were just trying to just sort of brainstorm people in the community that might be able to provide some insight. So we thought about church leaders because the church is again another place that people go to use the internet. They have desktop computers there. The youth council leaders of DSNI could tell us what they and their friends are using. There's a Best Buy right next to the neighborhood that Jason was mentioning.
Yeah.
It's like the local place you would buy any technological device. I mean, it's the only store it seemed to us. So
that's interesting.
It would be I don't know how easy that information would be to come by, but to speak with somebody at the store about what are your hottest selling gadgets,
Right.
And then finally on this list is business leaders. We're not sure who they are, so we put Chamber of Commerce in parentheses that they might be able to direct us. But how are their targets reached in the community? What ways do they use to advertise? Do they use a billboard? Do they send mailers to the house?
Mm-hmm.
Do they send emails? Are there ways that are being channels that are being utilized that we can try?
Okay, so lots and lots of questions, and also for more categories, more questions for Jason Webb. So let me introduce Jason Webb to the people who haven't been to the class before. He's our main contact with this neighborhood, the Dudley Street Neighborhood Association. And he is a young man who began working with the Neighborhood Association when he was 7 and has been with it ever since, and is now the IT director for it. And he knows everything about the neighborhood and is our sort of main interlocutor. And so the group has a lot of questions for him. How are you planning to reach out for your other community outreach questions? Can we just, as Parp said, just free ride on this and use this as a basis for the tech audit? So lots and lots of, this group generated lots and lots of questions. But for the people who haven't been here before, problem presented is how do you do a tech audit? How do you do a tech audit? How do you find out who's using what in the community? Do you have any ideas about that? Someone who's new?
I think that there is another way of kind of like approaching the problem, which we
sure.
Like as a techie, I would think that maybe an approach would be basically to try to get a census of how much 3G is being used, and that's available because it goes to the cell phone tower. out. So like in a way,
That's interesting.
If you would go and you would be able to get the buy-in of some of the providers to provide some of the data that they have about the region, you would be able to know and you would be able to compare, because you know what type of devices they use, how much bandwidth they consume, what types, and whatnot. So I think that there are sources that do have that data, that have done the audit. In a way, Apple knows how many apps have been downloaded from each location.
That's interesting, yeah.
Google knows, how many people use Gmail from that location, because the IPs tend to be quite localized. So there is the other approach, in which would be sort of, one is to leverage the power of the community, and try to ask themselves, and the other one is to try to find from the guys that already know, because it's part of their business.
Right, and they'll know what devices are being used too. So absolutely.
Comcast has all this information on cable, like internet subscriptions, by area, by sales, and they even Comcast Searchlight lets you advertise based on some metrics. So even if they wouldn't give you the data, you could pretend to be an advertiser and get it.
That's great. I love that. Okay, that's a great idea. Tell me, what's your name?
Matt.
Oh, right. Oh, so glad you're here. Okay, that's a fantastic idea. So we could circumvent the entire design process and just call Comcast. Sorry.
There's a great company based in Atlanta called Presage that has actually done a bunch of work with the MIT Sensible Cities folks. And they've got deals with all the big carriers nationally. So they, so rather than sort of going and working with a bunch of different local providers, it might be pretty easy to go.
Okay, so even forget the local providers. This is getting simpler and simpler, guys.
And also Skyhook.
Skyhook
is right here in Boston. They're very civic
right.
They do all the GPS infrastructure.
So maybe what we'll end up with is a set of lessons learned and instructions for another community to do this for themselves, based on talking to carriers. Maybe that's where we get to in the end. Yeah, Katie.
Assuming a lot of the resources used are public resources, though, right? At the library or the church, doesn't this then not really answer a question of how well technology infiltrates the community? If we know the community as a whole uses X whatever, that doesn't tell us who's using it, who it's getting to.
Right. Demographically.
Right.
Sliced. Right.
I feel like that's obviously incredibly helpful, but I do feel like you have to have some sort of survey level to really understand, who has their own cell phone or who's has maybe one whole family or those sorts of things.
And remember that the focus is the kids, their neighborhood. This neighborhood really sees its future, its metrics, as how kids do. Sorry, Patrick.
Yeah, no, a lot of these questions are based on how we get a survey to someone rather than actually determining the final data. So going to service providers, we provide a lot of data, but we're more concerned right now with how can we get questions to these people.
Yeah.
Can I have a little thought here? So I think with many of these projects, there's going to be a balance between breadth and depth. And so there's the approach that does a survey, which would get you some breadth, and then also get sort of like consumer market data around technology. And then there's an approach that would try and focus deeply on one or two archetypal users, right? And so maybe another way of thinking about this, and this won't get you statistical significance, right? But what it'll get you is a full picture about how a typical business leader interacts with technology throughout his or her day, or how a school teacher is used, right? So that what that says is that you attach yourself to one person. It doesn't have to be the whole day, right? But to go in depth with a sort of representative of a group. Again, that doesn't allow us to then extrapolate to the whole group, but it gives you a level of detail that's a little bit different than what you might get in a survey.
Right. Not sure that it answers the problem that the neighborhood is trying to solve, which did sound like an audit of who has what.
And I think maybe this is something that you guys have talked about. So if you have it's rather than like stop.
Right.
But I think that there's like two things. One thing is the devices. Do I have an iPad? Do I have a phone? What type and what not? And that's one type of audit. Another thing is, do I know how to use an iPad? There's a whole depth of knowing how to just download a couple of games to knowing how to program and create your own application. And I do think that it's a big difference, because having access to technology is not the same thing as knowing how to use that technology. And
Yeah.
we see that here all the time. You know, technology nowadays is extremely fragmented, and there's very specific niches of knowledge you need to know. So I think that in that domain, I don't know if you have talked about whether exploring this other dimension. You know, then after you have the device, people, how proficient are they in their use?
We haven't yet talked about digital literacy as part of this design project. It's clearly a problem for every underprivileged neighborhood. Literacy is a big problem. So I think a stage B of this process might involve a literacy question. Right now we're looking at the audit so far. But you're absolutely right. That may be missing a lot of the water. What's really important about asking the question.
Ultimately, a user is not necessarily the lack of the device, but having the device,
not knowing how to use it.
Or how to interact with a solution that someone creates.
What's great about this is that what might seem to be sort of a sterile question about an audit raises every kind of policy issue. Do we look at demographic slices? Do we look at archetypal people? It's either particular examples. Do we look at literacy in using the device? And so this group, which I'm using as an archetype because we're not going to be able to get through all the other groups, is just beginning to raise the question about what to ask people and where to go. We're just starting down this route. So I'm trying to attract those of you who haven't been here before to think this is really fascinating. You want to do it too. I want to look through the other groups to see what they come up with. Yeah, Kate.
Just one question I just seen is Jason at one point mentioned a buying survey that had done in the neighborhood to gauge disposable income to attract businesses. And I just wonder if that's something that might be worth mining to understand.
That's a good question.
Questions related to technology purchases, but maybe even that gives like an income or disposable income proxy that can be used and map to, based on this level of disposable income, here's the types of technology that kind of group might purchase.
Mm-hmm.
It might just provide a benchmark in a minimum.
Right. And benchmarks are going to be part of this evaluation and monitoring question. How is the thing that we're creating actually going to show change over time? How successful is it going to be? And using any available data is the way to work on that. Okay, yeah.
One more thought there is the school registration process. Actually, I think is an interesting opportunity. So every parent that's going to have the kids in this care school, they're not exactly clear what the registration process will be, but there obviously will be one. So it will be a time when the family, or some representative of the family will probably be there, and it might be a great chance to sort of ask a bunch of questions about the technology needs and uses.
Oh, that's interesting. All right, you taking notes, Group 1? Okay. Now, so Group 1 just really went to town, and also it's probably a little hard to see, but they're looking at existing Kennedy School professors who are good at surveys. Surveying itself is an entire field. So figuring out whether the survey that's done is good enough is a hard set of questions. Now, the mayor's office has worked with me to set up contacts for individual groups to talk to. People in the neighborhood, we're not going to start with that. We're going to start with people who are outside the neighborhood for you to sort of practice on, but who share attributes with people in the neighborhood. They know about the subject, or they have particular insights into what the challenges are. I didn't put email addresses on here. We have them, and I will email them to you. I just don't want to post all of that publicly. So the Group 1 contacts we're going to send you to are Dan Noyes and Ramon Soto. And Nigel and Chris can give you more details about these people, but they are good places to start. And they want to help you be better people, Group 1, and are going to be watching the way you interview and interacting with you and following up with me after that. So the second project, equally, they're all interesting. This one has different facets. This is the cultural punch card. The problem statement is one we have to sort of work on. What is the problem this is trying to solve? Are kids in the neighborhood not getting out to institutions in Boston adequately? Do they feel disconnected from the rest of the city? Or is the city not connecting enough to them? There are lots of questions here about what exactly is the problem, and the interviews will have to reveal this. This group came up with several questions for Dudley residents and leaders: cultural strengths, what events do you go to, what does cultural resources mean to you? The idea is that parents would take this virtual thing, whatever it is that we come up with, and go to different institutions and check in, or maybe there's a game that is this, and come up with ideas. Yes, Brittany.
I have a question about that.
Yeah.
How is it that we've already gotten to punch card phase? Is that something they requested?
This is the one that actually came from DSNI. They said, how about a cultural punch card? They suggested, but where's your question coming from? How can we discuss it?
I guess it's building on your point, which is we don't even know what this solves. You know?
We don't know what the problem is to solve, and you're going to have to ask about that.
And also just underlying that, what's the value to them of staying within the community versus going outside the community?
Right.
I mean, we can have that there. So, because I think the question that needs to be posed in the prompt is related to resources inside the Dudley Street neighborhood, but also in the city and then also in the region. So those are completely different.
Completely different things.
Resources.
Yeah.
And also, again, if you have a punch card in mind, it sounds, when I hear cultural resources in the community, first of all, I'm probably thinking of something completely different than somebody else in this room.
Right.
And I would think of maybe religion as like cultural resource, and I would not take my punch card to church. Or maybe
Right.
I would, but so I'm trying to, it would be interesting to hone in on what exactly they come.
Exactly, which is why I wanted to talk about what problem is this solving, and I think the interviews should go to that. Why?
Yeah.
We got a very short email that said, we'd like this, and we don't really know more about it.
Then we also, do they have examples of it?
Right.
Like, you don't just come with that out of the air. Right?
They must have been thinking about something. Now, do you have any comments about this one? Or Chris? I saw Chris. Or Dana?
So this is an idea that's come out of a lot of different communities, I think. And the idea is generally to find a way to connect people to the different opportunities, cultural opportunities. I totally agree with that from what you said. I think the basic theory here is that when we look at folks that are from some of these challenged inner city neighborhoods, one of those challenges are sort of the lack of their connection, the lack of richness of their networks across the city, because as you know, at the same jobs, so you find these opportunities. And so finding ways to enable people to make those connections, I think is where this comes out of. The idea being that if you've got some kind of, some maybe password's the wrong word, but some kind of mechanism to encourage you to make those connections sort of within the community, but also across the city, with the notion that you'll sort of gain the social capital and get connected to different opportunities for education, all kinds of stuff, jobs.
So the idea sounds like you're saying that it's like bridging them to.
I would say bridging them to different opportunities.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly people. I mean, the other opportunities might be in other areas. It certainly is not. People don't all have to come back.
Right.
Matt, so,
I think it's a component to discovery here. So, food analysis. How do you actually surface, these are incredible places of activity, history, stories. How do you actually make any of those actually more tangible and more discoverable for students? And so, Dylan, you get to how you don't know the punch card, so definitely dive into all the specifics that you're asking. But this is really how do you make activity and history to come alive? Give any of its promise actually explore those things.
So that's everybody. That's Chris Osgood, also with the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics, and also Dana Conroy's here. So everybody's here. Matt?
So a great example of this is this loyalty card that 6 independent coffee shops in Boston got together to do fight Starbucks. You've got Voltage Coffee, 1369, a number of different coffee shops where you can go to any of them and get points. And it's basically harnessing the tactics that these huge mega stores can do as a brand and a chain, and applying them to local communities rather than Best Buy. So,
Nifty. So maybe you'd like to work with us on this one.
Cool.
Okay, good. I like it. Yeah. Maria, in back.
Yeah, so, it sounds like you guys are still kind of working on the overall thing, how this might go down, but in terms of actually getting people to punch card or check in different locations, just an idea, I know a lot of you guys mentioned the one card. I think maybe if you guys have a one card receiver set up in different areas, people could swipe, and then if kids go to a certain number of locations or something like that, maybe they get a certificate.
Right. Just adding on to an existing system. Helena.
This might be a kind of problematic information source, but it's there nonetheless. For the last 2 years, I've worked in informal science education program evaluation, and a big part of that a lot of stuff coming out of MIT, like the Cambridge Science Festival and other things where MIT Museum and trying, where there are all these institutions with cultural resources, especially around like science and technology in Cambridge, that are trying to reach these neighborhoods. And so I did a lot of survey work with that, where we were trying to figure out who's attending the Cambridge Science Festival, how did they hear about it, where are they coming from. There's like the other end of the data source where people are really trying to explore how, better ways to reach people. So there is data at code level at least there.
Right, and so this group cleverly thought about the supply side as well as the demand side. So the last set of questions is for cultural institutions. What audiences are you not reaching? Where opportunities to develop them? Okay, so lots to do here. Really fascinating problem. Well, first we have to figure out what the problem is that we're trying to solve and make sure that the people that we interview are interested in that. Here are contacts that we thought about for you to initially get to. A GSD student who ran my.tour.org and started the Museum of the Future, and a mayor's advisor who's a program manager for this, and also the mayor's chief of tourism and special events. So these are fantastic people for this group to go and meet with and show paper prototypes to and really practice interviewing and find out what's needed. Okay, so let me just zoom through the rest of this. Charter school, another fascinating question. How do you get the community to understand the charter school and the charter school to understand the community better? Lots of questions here about how they've already been engaging with communities, efforts to collect ideas. This is one of the broader design briefs. It springs on some of the work that we've already done in the class. They're very interested people who already worked with this neighborhood applied for a lot of federal money for planning purposes, the Promise Neighborhood Grant application. And so we should be able to ride on top of that work. And the city has identified the key person who the group already said they wanted to talk to, who is Deb Sosha. And she's ready to work with us and make us better people and more experienced about charter schools. And she's going to be your interview subject, right, for the next stage. Okay? Former principal of the middle school and really knows everything about this neighborhood and the charter school. And then finally, two of these planning, envisioning, and outreach things. So group 4 has this mammoth thought process challenge of how is this neighborhood, this very well-organized neighborhood whose governance structure is pretty set, going to envision its future, plan its campus for its next stage. And lots of questions here for community organizers and youth leaders. This is a fascinating one. I hope the MIT people are like lighting up about this. Like, how does a neighborhood envision its future? What do we do? Put kiosks, big streams of bits flowing across the neighborhood. What do we do? And there's a lot of experience we want to draw on here. Lots of questions. The contacts for Group 4 for this first stage are going to be Eric Gordon, who built Community Planet, which is a game-oriented platform that allows communities to think about their future by placing value-oriented coins on their side of the board. You're going to love Eric, and he's ready to work with us. And also Judith Curlin, the former chief of staff of the mayor's office. So that's a good one for planning. Good person to talk to about how you do a planning process. So again, these aren't users. These are subject matter experts and people who know about the neighborhood. But that's where we're starting for now, for the interview process. Good place to practice. And then Group 5, how is the neighborhood going to reach out to more people? The group said we want to speak to the Jose Barros and the neighborhood coordinators with knowledge of these outreach efforts. Here, again, two fantastic people to talk to. Dana Whiteside, who does this community economic development for the Boston Redevelopment Authority, and Alberto Teixeira, who's the Deputy Chief of Human Services at Boston City Hall. So thanks so much to the Mayor's Office for setting up these people who are ready to engage with us. And I will send all of you the email addresses for this next stage. But remember, paper prototypes, great interviewing skills, build archetypes, and also think about 3 examples of this thing in the world for the next class. Come back with examples of how other groups have faced these projects. We're not the first one. This is not the first time these questions have been asked. Okay, so that's where we are right now. I hope that's really attractive to people who haven't been here before. I think this is tremendously exciting. We're just sort of plunging ahead. Yes? Catherine.
In this very early stage,
Yeah.
we still know very little, I think, relative to DSNI.
Yes.
Is there an opportunity to talk to them to help us shape types of questions?
No, this is where we're going to start. There's a lot of information about DSNI in the materials on the website, on the how they applied for their grant, who's there, that kind of thing. It's slightly abstract, but and some of these people also already have a lot of knowledge about Dudley. So ask them what they know about Dudley. But Nigel, Chris, you want to weigh in?
So one of the things that we could do is that there are some good pinch hitters here that basically could talk to any of these issues, like Judith.
Yeah.
Is a font of knowledge, pretty much about everything that we're talking about.
Yeah.
So we can imagine.
Can we assign Judith to everybody?
Yeah, kind of. We have a really good relationship here, so I think that we could maybe come up with a different.
I'll work with Strong as well.
I think to get to the question, I think that might be really good. So get that next level of depth, having everyone speak to you.
Okay, so I'll give that contact information to everybody. And they'll have 6 interviews. They'll do it. These guys are really engaged, really interested in making this work well. Okay, so interview process about to begin. Any questions? Anybody? Okay, let's take a short break, and then we'll be joined by Nick Grossman, who's a fantabulous guy, and one of the great benefits for me of coming to Boston is getting to know Nick. So let's move around for about like 3 or 4 minutes, and then hear from Nick. Thanks.
Bathrooms, for those who need it, are sort of go out this way.
That was nice of you to say.
It has been great. I'm so glad you're here.
Seriously, likewise. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm not revealing your secret plans either.
Oh yeah, I can talk about them.
Oh, you are?
Well, they're not. It's not super.
Hey.
It's okay. How are you? How did your big reveal go the other night? I'm sorry I couldn't come.
It was fun. It was like kind of gut-wrenching, but anyway.
Gut-wrenching? Yeah. Wait, so can you give me the 30-second version?
So maybe what we want to do, though, is we're on a Hangout here.
Oh, do we need to be on the big screen?
Let's just figure out how to make sure.
Is
there any way that you could email her whatever you're doing?
Yeah, I can just, do you have Keynote on here?
She should. Let me look. Does she have Keynote? Yep, she does.
Yeah.
And the reason for that.
Let me get my.
Yeah, 5th floor. Go down 1 floor. You'll see the lounge area. Wait, do you have Keynote, Susan?
Can we? Is there a? I'm going to use the screen. So is there do we need to be on the screen? It won't stop the Hangout.
It will not stop the Hangout. We've been screen sharing so they can see the slides.
Oh.
But what we could do is turn this around so that it's through this.
Screen share.
Let's try that. Let's try that here.
Sure.
Yeah, let's give it a shot.
I see. Makes sense. I just, I'm always nervous to move things around.
I know.
Last
I know. Invariably.
Oh, that's my son. Not bad, huh?
It'll be crappy quality, but maybe what we'll do is put the.
We can try it. Should we just try it? I'll export as.
I think what's more important is that the folks in the room get a good sense of where you're coming from, and we'll try and make do with this.
That's not that good, is it? We can. Let's just switch it. It'll just take a second.
It looks like it wanted us to buy iWork.
I'll just export it as a PDF. Yeah, that will work. Let's see if we can get it.
No, they are. They're in
Should have mentioned it.
That's okay. This happens.
what they really want. Right.
Hey, what's up, Nigel? How are you?
Good. I can't stay unfortunately.
Yeah, you. Oh, cool. Awesome.
Good.
Is Joel?
How are you?
Who exactly are you? Yeah.
Who exactly are you interviewing?
Anyway, so I'll catch you later.
Sounds good. Hey, Nigel, we should do.
We will actually be doing this.
I think the goal is to interview community members, and the intermediate step there is to interview, sort of test out your questions, gather more information before talking to them, experts, either about a particular issue, like how to do technology, or about neighborhood aspects of a particular issue or area. These are the sort of steps that mentors and advisors, players often before we do
So we're basically getting information from process mentors and kind of like finding exactly
I think so, as a source of information for ultimately people so that you have that kind of background. But the fact that you're asking Look okay?
Yeah. I'm ready.
Cut off.
It's just squish.
Are you still doing it for
Can I just join the Google Hangout and share my screen?
Why didn't we think of that before?
Oh, they were too easy.
All right, let's keep going.
It's going to take us another minute, I
We
think.
just see this.
Oh, sorry. You do
Yeah.
need to. I think you need to clarify something. Which is that I got a question. So are we? Who are we
What's the
actually?
name of the Google Hangout?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll invite you to it.
So here's just to follow up on the questions I got during the break. These are practice interviews with real people.
Are you already in your circles? Are you already in your circles?
They're practice in the sense that these are not the ultimate users. But you're also going to be creating archetypes of these people, the real people, the ones you're talking to. So you're meeting a community developers. What are their challenges? Just that, the people you meet. And there's a picture of them. What role do they play in society? What role do they play in the design process for this thing? Even though they're not themselves living in the community or themselves working for the charter school, they play a role in Boston Dynamics that you're going to abstract to in those slides. You're also going to learn, Judith Curley knows everything about that. Any group can interview her. She's on the board of DSNI. There's lots of information. She's available to all of you. So you can treat her as a huge resource. I bet the groups are going to compete now to get to her. She has real idea. So just be totally clear. This is an interview of a real person from whom you're going to abstract both an archetype and substantive information. This person happens not themselves to live in this neighborhood, but you're going to be learning information that you and teaching the rest of us about it. Because next week you're going to present the results of these interviews, the archetypes and what you do. Does that make sense? Clarify? Okay. I'm not here to confuse. I'm trying to do this right. All right, we're still doing, for some reason.
We're a little stuck here.
We're stuck? Can you just talk?
Yeah, why don't you just do a presentation?
Just do the presentation.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so let me introduce you. So Nick Grossman, who is a big brain in residence here at the MIT Media Lab, is an urbanist, loves cities, loves technologies, and runs Civic Commons these days, which is an attempt to help cities have technology they can all use. And we thought a million interests. He's an open cities evangelist, open plans. He's an advisor to Code for America, but has been very involved with Open 311 and Transportation Camp and lots of other things. And the question I wanted us to discuss with Nick was how do you work with, visualize, make interoperable big data? And as a new city employee faces big data, what are you supposed to do? So that's Nick's problem statement, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he's going to come up with. So thank you very much.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, Nick.
How are you? All right, I'm Nick. I know a bunch of you. Don't know most of you. Good to meet you. So I'm going to talk about big data and visualization a little bit. I'm going to talk about open data and open standards and how cities can work more like the internet. As Susan said, I love cities and I love the internet. They have a lot in common as being sort of complex ecosystems that work in amazing ways, but not necessarily the way that you expect them to. And I spent most of my career kind of thinking about the parallels between how cities work and how the internet works and how the infrastructure that's beneath both plays into how they feel. So I've got a picture of a giant wave here, and I think about big data and the internet and networks as like a giant tidal wave, and it's coming and it's changing everything, and you can either kind of stand in front of it and fight it, or you can turn around and ride on it, and amazing things happen when you turn around and ride on it, but it's not your first impulse. Surfing doesn't feel strange, right? But there's great power behind it, but you lose a lot of control, but you get to do incredible stuff. You know, living in New York City is kind of like surfing, and using the internet is kind of like surfing. So today we're going to talk a little bit about data. We're going to talk a little about the internet, and we're going to talk about standards and why standards are important. And that's where it gets into interoperability and openness. And my goal is to convert all of you into being open evangelists for open innovation and open data and open platforms by the end of the time. A little bit about my background. I've worked with a number of nonprofit organizations at the intersection of civic issues and technology and media. Open Plans is a technology and media nonprofit in New York City that works on urban policy issues and open source technology. Code for America, you guys have probably heard of. It's Teach for America for Geeks. Civic Commons is a joint program of Open Plans and Code for America that I worked on for the past year and a half that helps advance the open innovation agenda in cities. I'm also a visiting scholar here at the Media Lab with the Matt Center, who I always like to call out whenever I have a chance. And I'm also starting a new project very shortly on internet policy and innovation policy and how networks are changing everything, why that's a good. That's my background. So let's talk about data for a little bit. I read the summary piece from the Aspen Institute. Did you guys all read that? Okay, so I'm not going to try and repeat anything, and I'm not as expert as any of the people who were quoted in that article, and I'm going to touch on some of that stuff, but not all of it. But data is everywhere. You know, if there's a skill that you need to have, it's figuring out how to work with data on the statistics side and also on the policy side, because it kind of touches everything these days. I don't know how many of you guys saw this article from about a week ago in the Times, and then Forbes covered it with a better headline. But a father walked into Target furious because they had been sending his daughter baby care coupons in the mail. And he said, "What are you trying to convince my daughter to go out and make babies?" And they said, "Well, no." And it turns out that they, based on her purchasing history, had figured out that she was pregnant, and in fact she was. And so this, because they were sending your baby coupons because of it, and this raises lots of weird questions about how you work with data. Did any of you guys read this article in the Times? So the funny thing in the end is the conclusion that it came to was, okay, let's not send only baby coupons. Let's mix the baby coupons in with other coupons so that we don't creep people out. So that's funny. You're seeing data policy stuff coming up everywhere in pop culture these days. Closer to the civic sector, there was a kind of interesting story coming out of San Francisco a few years ago where a company issued a takedown notice to an app that was taking real-time data from San Francisco buses and bringing it to smartphones because they said, we actually own the rights to that data. And the developer said, well, what do you mean? This is like where the buses are. And San Francisco community said, what do you mean? This is where the buses are, and this is our data. And they got into a big kerfuffle about it because it wasn't clear when they signed the arrangement whether the raw data about where the buses were was public information versus the computed arrival estimates that the private entity was producing. So these questions of data ownership come up a lot, and this was ended up being negotiated in favor of the city, but it took a long time and raised a lot of eyebrows. And so none of this stuff is figured out yet, as you know. This is just a sexy infographic from Wired magazine from a year and a half ago. Stephen Johnson, who's an amazing writer about data and cities and technology and biology and how they all are the same thing, did a piece on Open 311, or on 311, which is people sending issue reports into their cities. Am I right that you guys have been working with Citizen Connect or studying Citizen Connect with the cities? Awesome. Okay. So Citizen Connect is an example of a 311-like application, and we'll talk more about 311 in a second. But clearly you start to see things about how cities work when you can visualize the data, such as when people care about noise versus when they care about chlorofluorocarbon recovery, and other things that you might not think about. Here's a pretty nifty data visualization that the New York Times did a couple years ago based on taxi data from New York City where the pickup and drop-offs were, and you start to be able to uncover issues about equity. Where do taxis not like picking people up at night? Where are they not cruising? All kinds of things can get surfaced. This is an example of where the data was given a special case from the Taxi Commission to a research group based here in Cambridge called Sense Networks. And these are some visualizations that were produced coming out of the MBTA developer contest in 2009. Anybody guess what these are? Anybody know what they are? Yeah. Yeah. So it's I believe it's swipes by time, by line. So each one is a line. Each ring is a station on the route, and then clockwise is the time of day. So you can see 6:30, 6 to 8 p.m. has a high volume on the green line. Anyway, point is this is cool, and it tells you something maybe. But, and I wonder what my next slide is. Right. So most importantly about this one and the one in the New York Times and the 311 graphic is that these visualizations were not created by the government. They were created by other people who were using that data, who had access to that data for some reason or another. And that's pretty cool. And the biggest point that I like to make about the internet and innovation in cities is the idea that the internet is an open, distributed system that lets anyone participate using a set of standards to facilitate that. And that's kind of a big idea. So we'll talk about the internet. This is a tiny bit technical, but not really that bad. Okay, so on the left you have what networks look like in the old days, centralized out to the center. This is what the T looks like. also. And then on the far right, you have a distributed peer-to-peer network. The internet, as we know it now, is somewhere in the middle, where there are sort of common points and so on. But the idea of working towards a distributed, decentralized, working in an environment that's decentralized and distributed is just sort of fundamentally different than working in a centralized environment. The same way that working in a bottom-up way is fundamentally different than working in a top-down way. This just sort of permeates everything about open innovation and cities and the internet, in my view. So each of these blue dots is a website. Each of the little lines is the websites talking to each other. And the way that you add a new website to the internet, and this is sort of a simplification, is that you build it using something called HTML, which is a markup language. It doesn't matter what you use on the inside of the blue dot. And CSS is another thing that styles it. And then web pages talk to each other using a set of open protocols called Internet Protocol, the domain name system, and the hypertext transfer protocol. And it doesn't really matter about the details of those things. It just matters that there is a standard way that things interconnect. You don't have to ask anyone permission to go create a website. All you have to do is create a website that create something that implements those standards, and it knows how to talk to everything else. So this is distributed. All you do is implement the standards, and then voila, you exist. These are standards. And this constitutes an open architecture and a platform upon which things can be built. Another aspect of the internet that's important, the architecture of the internet, and this is using actually buses as an example, which we'll talk about, is layering. The idea that there are different functions happening at different layers, and you can swap out something at one layer for some other equivalent piece without affecting the rest of the system, which makes it modular. That's really important. And then in between each of the layers are more standards. So what the internet is really a set of agreements on how are we going to communicate with one another, rather than any one person having control over access. In the case of this example, which we'll talk about a little bit more, you've got a closed, vertically integrated system versus a modular, layered system. When you have a layer of standards that you can build on top of, any application, whether it's one that I create or one that you create or one 5 years down the line that somebody else creates, talks to those same standards, those same data sources, and has the same access to exist as anything else. And so when you build things in a layered, modular way with an eye towards interoperability, you open up the potential for new things to be added to the system that you might not have planned yourself, or you might not have expected. And particularly in the government space, this is like a really, really big idea. This is kind of like riding the wave. We're not making everything. Whoops. What did I do? Shoot. There we go. You're not making everything. You're creating the potential for things to get made by you and also by others. And a quote I really like about this from John Palfrey at the Berkman Center is that open innovation is about the idea that the creators of new ideas don't have to be within your organization in order to be helpful. And when we think about what open innovation means, whether it's regarding data or open source or ideas, or this idea from switching from we create everything top-down internally to we create a platform around which other things can be made is the big idea. So I want to talk a little bit more about standards and how standards can turn small data into big data. So take the example of buses again. And by the way, the reason I have all the transit examples is that I've worked at Open Plans. All of our work was in the public transit base. So I've done a lot of work with transit agencies, and Francisca, who you guys know, I guess, has worked with us on some of our projects and knows all about this stuff. But transit is actually a really great place to look because there's so much work on open data and space. So waiting for the bus sucks. It's cold. You're in Pittsburgh. It's snowing. You're grumpy, like rightfully. And this is a quote from a study that surveyed people who were using a smartphone app, tell them when the bus is coming. And guess what? People like to know when the bus is coming. It makes their life better. So that's kind of obvious, right? what's less obvious is how you get from the idea that that's good to implementing it in a way that unlocks all the potential. So what you've seen over the past 10 years or 6 or 7 years is development of big explosion of apps for transit. Every city's got lots and lots of transit apps. It started in Portland, Boston has them, New York City, Chicago. There are apps that work all over the place, sort of really friendly, simple apps like putting an LED sign in a storefront that says when the next bus is coming, to more creative apps like if my train is delayed, wake me up earlier so that I can catch an earlier train, which is pretty clever. And again, none of these apps, by and large, were created by the agencies themselves. They were built on top of open data and standardized open data. And it's not just about convenience and just using a city, like using a bus. There's unlimited potential applications for open data in thinking about how cities work. So this is a guy named Mike Fruman who works at New York City Transit. He went to MIT. He's a transit nerd and a data hacker and an awesome guy. And he writes an amazing blog. And this post was about what if you didn't have the subway, and how much extra parking would that require in Manhattan? And let's see, this says train moves 1,000 people cross into the central business district of New York City every 6 seconds on the subway. If you didn't have the subway, you'd need 324,000 additional vehicles into the center of New York City every day. What would that look like? And he did a simple visualization that said if you added that many parking lots to Manhattan, this is what it would look like. And what's amazing about this is that it takes like some numbers and makes it like so visceral and like, to the point of being ludicrous. And this is made possible by open data sets. So anyway, so back to this idea of layering and standards in between each layer as the thing that makes it possible to build new and unexpected things on top of data and on top of open data. The question is then, how do you make that happen? And how many of you guys work in government or have worked in government? And any of you in technology in government? So the question of how you make this happen is like a really interesting question. You don't just sort of say, there will be an ecosystem of transit apps. Wouldn't that be nice? It's like this weird art of collaboration and coordination and dancing and working together. So I really like looking at the story of how everything that you've seen in transit came to be. And it turns out that it all started with the transit agency in Portland, Oregon, TriMet, very progressive technologically. In 2005, Google approached TriMet and said, we have this new app called Google Transit, a new website called Google Transit. Would you like to have your data in it so that people can search transit routes in Portland? And Portland said yes. But rather than just secretly give them the data, which would have been the easy, obvious thing to do and the safe thing to do, they gave them the data publicly, and at the same time developed a format to transmit that data, which is called the Google Transit Feed Specification. It's a text format that describes routes and schedules for a transit system. And so this was like the key breakthrough, where it was, we're not just, we're doing this in an open, extensible way, because who knows what else could happen after that happens. And the woman who runs the department there, Bibiana McHugh, is incredible, and she's a visionary, and we're very lucky that this happened. And then all of a sudden, the amazing thing is that other transit agencies said, well, we want to get our data into Google Transit, and so they started producing Google Transit Feed specification files available to the public. And all of a sudden, not only could you share those with Google Transit, but you could share them anywhere, and anybody could use them. And then thereby ballooned the transit app ecosystem. But what's fascinating about this is that it worked because there was a really, really powerful force in Google Transit pulling giving the agencies the incentive to publish their data in an open way, in a simple way. There had been parallel efforts to come up with standardization schemes for transit data for years that were getting nowhere because they were locked in sort of theoretical, slow discussion among standards bodies, and this happened sort of as an end run to all that. So the standards are important, and then thinking about open data and it changes the way you manage your agency. So have you guys met the folks from the MBTA as part of your courses? So there are a pair of guys who came into the MBTA in 2009, Josh Robin and Chris Dempsey, who, given some sort of miraculous amount of political cover, were given runway to open up data and do developer outreach. And at the time, everybody was like, what is that? And what they did was they created a developer page on the website where they started publishing data sets. But most importantly, they created a genuine dialogue with developers. So this is the Mass DOT Developers Google group, where anybody who wants to build transit apps using Boston data can email in a question or post the app that they built or send in a suggestion for changes or correct errors in the data. And they have meetups. I actually met these guys at a meetup here a couple of years ago. This is a different one, and that's in Portland. But what's amazing about this story is that all of the really neat visualizations and the potential, the apps, the potential for new things didn't come from, it came from a very bottom-up process where it was, we're going to open data, we're going to just connect with some folks and see what they want to do and see what their interests are and see what they need. And over the past couple of years, that's turned into a real thriving community where they've had several rounds of app contests. The one that they're working on right now is integrating bike data from the hubway with transit data. It's a multimodal thing, and it's really sort of become part of a big movement. But the takeaway is that, and I think this is also sort of gets back to the values embedded in the internet, that it's not just about open data or open standards, it's about genuine person-to-person connections. Yeah.
This might be a silly question, but the people who are developing these apps, they're not getting any sort of financial benefit like from the city, right? It's only they can use open data and perhaps sell their app, but there's no like contract between you.
That's right. There have been a couple cases where, and lots of cities do app contests around different sub-periods. Oftentimes they'll be prize money for the contest, but it's not a traditional we hire you, you build it. Okay. The incentive structure is different. People and one of the things actually that was that Boston, the MBTA did that was pretty forward-thinking is they set out a set of principles for engagement with developers at the beginning that said, we want you to make money off of these apps. Whereas leading up to this, there had been a lot of resistance elsewhere in the industry for opening up data because of, oh, we're giving you our data, we own that, now you're going to go make a business on it, and it gets complicated when you think about who should be capturing the value around data of all sorts. And then quickly, I just wanted to show another, a separate example that's about open standards and how that connects with an open data ecosystem is the Open for One project. This is actually an unpublished version of the website that has dummy headings on it, so we won't be launching it with the Social Sweater Vest incubator. So Citizens Connect is one example of a 3-in-1 app where people can report a pothole or broken street lamp or whatever. We saw this pretty visualization of what do you get when you look at a whole city. In 2009, when I was with Open Plans, we realized that you were seeing a lot of one-off apps in different places that were doing the same thing. So Fix My Street is one that was built in the UK, very popular. This is another one in the Netherlands that does pretty much the same thing. This is an American company called SequelFix, which also does the same thing. And then you had folks building apps in Boston. New York City has a 3-in-1 system. Portland, lots of other cities have them. And they were all doing them independently at the same time. And so what we did is we said, okay, this is an example of lots of small data. How can we move that towards being a standard that everyone can adopt, and then we can build on top of it in an easy way. And we spent several years working to coordinate this community where you now have something like 40 cities that have adopted a common specification for 3-in-1 reports, which is called Open 3-in-1. So just like the Google Transit feed specification was transit, this is to issue reporting and question and answer. And so you've, yeah.
Now who pays for the app? Does the city pay for the app?
It depends. It's different in every case. So in the case of Boston, they did pay for the Citizens Connect app. New York City developed their 3-in-1 app in-house. SeeClickFix, which is this company here, offers a free service which anybody can use, and then cities can, if they want to, also pay a fee to get special features on the back end. Some apps that are developed, the city has nothing to do with at all. There's one called Tweet by 3-in-1 in San Francisco, which you can send tweets into the city, and somebody built that for free just because the city created this data access point. Yeah.
So are you seeing like this space mature beyond app contests into cities actually hiring developers currently?
Yeah. Talk to Chris about that. They're just hired. Did you hire your
we've hired a bunch of folks, including connected bits who built Citizens Connect. But what is interesting to explain, so we launched Citizens Connect, as you guys all know, in 2009. We've since adopted the Open 3-in-1 standard, so if you use SeeClickFix today in Boston, it goes into our system. If you use any number of other sort of free apps that we've built, it all goes into our system. All because we're basically organized around the standard that everybody's using.
Yeah, and the Code for America folks who worked with Boston last year are now going out into their 8 cities, and they're building Open 3-in-1 systems in all of those cities. They have an app called the Open 3-in-1 Dashboard, which I had a slide of that I took out, which just can give you instant visualization of where things are happening, what's happening where in the city. And now any city that has adopted the 3-in-1 standard can use that app, and it'll just work. And to answer your question further, yes, there are examples where it's not just about app contests, and there's sort of more institutionalized development around open data and open standards. Open Plans, where I worked, is now delivering the real-time data for New York City buses around an open source platform, and that was like a real contract where the city is paying somebody to not build the apps on, or build some of the apps on top, but build the open infrastructure. And you're starting to see, and this is where I think it should go, is that invest in building a more open central infrastructure that can have things built on top of it, and also other things. And anyway, so that Chris's point is actually exactly the point of the section, which maybe I don't get to, but is that by working towards open standards and adopting open standards the same way that the internet is built around open standards, you open up the potential to do data mining, analysis, app development across many cities at the same time. And then, of course, you get into all the hairy issues about big data that I haven't talked about that are all in the paper about, okay, so now you can triangulate people's identities because of their 3-in-1 requests, and how do you protect against that, and so on and so forth. So that's it. I think like I said, this is really not explicitly about big data, but it's really about how open architectures fit into an ecosystem of big data, and all of this stuff is happening. And the one thing I want to get across is for those of you that are thinking about going into government, the idea of riding the wave and realizing that all of this data is flowing and is out there, and that it would be futile to try and fight it, but instead you kind of have to roll with it and understand how it works and harness it and connect with the developers and understand sort of how the mechanics on the back end of data, open data, can work and could work in order to give the most potential is where the big opportunity is. And so that's where I've been doing most of my work. And that's it. That's all I have. So happy to talk about anything. Yeah.
In addition to these like quality of life applications and benefits of open data, have you seen any way that, or anything can be used to help vulnerable or disadvantaged communities or address social problems as opposed to sort of raising ease of life for everyone?
Sure. I mean, there's a great example. This is not totally an open data thing, but kind of Two that I can think of. There's a project in Nairobi called Map Kibera where there was like a crowdsourced mapping of a slum that had been ignored by the government. So if you looked at the government-produced Google Maps, there's just a big empty gray area. But a group whose name I can't remember went and did a crowdsourcing data creation project that identified actual community assets in this very interesting place that were ignored or that weren't, weren't visible otherwise. And so it's not necessarily about big data, but using networks and crowdsourcing and people being connected, I think there's an opportunity to democratize some of what data is collected and noticed. There was one other.
The idea you would notice anomalies in data and visualize them in ways that can help you direct resources towards variable neighborhood. It's just an idea. You can create a heat map of health issues. And there are all kinds of applications that can use this open 311 data.
That's right.
So not just about potholes, but
right.
about illness and crime and the sort of broken windows theory.
So there's another example. If you, I love your presentation, and and maybe you can tell it's like a doer and an optimist, and it shows all the stuff. And if you think of the space of big data, I would say that there's some parts of it that are much more developed than others. So when it comes to transportation, it's very developed. But there are places that is not as developed. When it comes to health, obviously it's data that is a little bit more private, but even data that in principle you would use for transportation, some people have been using for that purpose. So with mobile phones, people can look at the mobility of individuals, and actually, by looking at the mobility tracks of individuals, it is possible to have something that correlates very strongly with the probability with someone who develop diabetes in the future. So you can even have ways of kind of like determining who would be more like, or who you should screen, for a certain type of disease. Because when you think about it, this large data, what it gives is kind of like a fingerprint. A fingerprint is useful because it has a lot of grooves and it's very, very intricate. So you have a lot of points to look at and you can identify people uniquely. When you have data that is very disaggregated, you also have these unique ways of identifying people. That's where the privacy risks come from. But at the same time, because the data is so rich, if you move it one way or another, you're going to find ways that you get correlates with things that you care about. And that doesn't mean that there's causality. You're not doing an econ paper to try to prove causality. You're not doing causality, but you're trying to actually find, a way of maybe determining something that would be hard to measure, otherwise. So the diabetes is an example of that, and there are other examples. But it gives you a little bit of an idea, and also it gives you an idea that the system has been biased towards where it has been easier, to make progress than other places.
No, that's exactly right. And I think the reason we're seeing so much around potholes and transit is that as sort of small and seemingly inconsequential as they are, they're still enormously controversial inside of government. So I literally spent 3 years trying to convince transit agencies that they should publish their route and schedule data, which seems crazy. But even so, something like that's not controversial at all. It's like a huge culture shift. So I think the movement is at a point where it's been low-hanging fruit, sort of trying to prove a point, starting with things that are clear and obvious, and sort of clearly utilitarian, and hopefully paving a way for an understanding of how to get at other deeper stuff.
I would note that there is a spectrum, right? That goes potholes on one end, and on the other. All of your group projects are focused on people. Sorry, kind of crazy way of saying it, but they're all focused on this. You should definitely think through beyond the tech audits. What's the data that's actually being collected in any of your efforts? What's the appetite to actually disclose anything? How would you actually sensibly provide that, and then to what benefit to share that? It's worth it to have those conversations with me too, because ideally with everything you guys are creating during the course of this semester, the idea isn't to do it in one neighborhood in one city. It's to actually have that same sort of network growth that Nick showed.
And I think we have to think a lot about what's the problem we're trying to solve and how does that data help us solve the problem. So the transit example is great because you can think about the data that a transit agency releases in two ways, right? So before MBTA released the actual location and arrival predictions for their buses and their vehicles, they were publishing scorecards on their performance, right? So you can imagine, okay, if MBTA, first actually released the on-time performance of a particular route, the percent of the percent of time that a particular bus actually met its schedule. Well, nobody uses that information because it doesn't actually help solve the problem. Where is my bus right now today? If I understand the probability of my bus arriving, it's just not actionable information. Whereas a prediction is the actionable piece of information, but a lot of the data we have is like the performance information, right? And so that's more of a collective action problem. Like the pathway to go from on-time performance to actually getting my bus to arrive when I need it to arrive is a much longer pathway than the decision that I can make with a prediction of exactly when my bus is going to arrive.
A question for you here. People are really worried about race, too. Can you talk about why they're worried, what some of the concerns are?
Sure. I honestly, I think the reading which I did, was amazing. But it's creepy when people. It's not clear how folks who are using data are using it, how they're getting it, who's sharing it, how it can affect you socially, personally, economically, whether that's my boss walks by my computer and sees an ad for something, I don't know, that shouldn't, or it's denied for insurance or a credit card. I don't know. I mean, there are a million reasons to be afraid of it.
So let me add a little bit to that with some examples. So some examples of why would people be afraid of data. And there's two issues. The first thing is it would be very easy now with some of the data that we have to know to which type of church do you go. If you go to some type of church, or maybe you were cheating on your wife or husband, or there's things that become a little bit transparent. Now. One thing is that gets registered in the data, and the other thing is, well, would you be able to fish it out in the data? And the answer is yes, that it's very easy to fish things out in the data. And once again, it's the fingerprint analogy. So actually, there's a paper that we have been working on, in which we look at mobile phone data. Okay, and the resolution of mobility on mobile phone data is based on the number of cell phone towers that you have. In the case that you have more cell phone towers, you have higher resolution, and usually cell phone towers kind of like tend to follow population density. So downtown Boston, lots of cell phone towers. In the middle of Oklahoma, very few cell phone. Now, take a guess how many locations do I need to know about you to identify you with a 95% probability? How many locations do you need? For a fingerprint, I do 12 points on a fingerprint. Three. Actually 4. Yeah. So now, if I would get a hands on that data set, and I wouldn't know at all where who Nick is, because the code, their old hash, the identities have been removed. I would, well, but Nick is kind of like at the middle of this time of the day, and I know that he went to New York this day, and I would be able to fish it out, and then I would get, only from those 3 points I was able to fish all of the remaining traits. So the data, one thing is that you can anonymize it, but the other thing is that it's easy to de-anonymize because of the uniqueness of our patterns. So then you would be able to identify the things, and people could think that I could get denied insurance. Now the other question is nowadays, given that there's no open data, is there like a black market for data maybe going on that is pretty rampant? And I would probably not bet against that. Okay.
Last term I taught law of surveillance, and private carriers have unlimited data about our whereabouts and every incentive to sell it. So certainly there's just a tsunami of data out there, and there are lots of worries about how, if you depersonalize it, take away how easy it is to add water and find perfectly who you're talking about. But nonetheless, HHS, lots of health organizations across the country are trying to figure out how to use technology to help people solve their problems and open up that data in a depersonalized way so that we can make progress. But we're just at the beginning.
And I think that trying to avoid the problem and no, data should be kept, like locked in our ball and everything, like trying to cover the sun with a finger.
Yeah.
So it's like think of a past point in time where there was a technology that was disruptive and for you it's commonplace, like like electric bulb, like, oh, people maybe is gonna, I don't know, keep their lights up and they're gonna bother the neighbors or the car. People get killed in a car. Car is a weapon. You can run over someone pretty easily if you would get a responsible driver. You can kill yourself or your family by crashing into a tree or to another car. But nevertheless, cars sort of like remain that. We have safety belts and we have ABS brakes. So you kind of just. I don't think that when technology appears, it's something that is prevalent, and you're not going to eliminate it by forbidding it. So we're going to have to learn to live in a world in which we know more about ourselves. Just to give another example, given that this group is from the Kennedy School, you know how old our property taxes? Like if you own a house, you pay taxes. You pay rent to the city. So you know how old the property taxes, like in the history of mankind. Because they're not that old. They're like a few hundred years old. Actually, the first implementation of property taxes in England goes to the late 1600s, where the windows and door tax, and they would tax windows and doors, because it was easier than counting the house, and because people didn't want to get taxed. People were like, believe it or not, they don't like taxes so much. So at that time, they believed that having the government know about their personal income was a breach of privacy, and it was a complete outrage. Nowadays, everybody knows that the government knows about your income, maybe better than you. Or if they don't know as good as you do, you can't go to prison. So you see, kind of like how society has changed for that. When we live in larger groups, our government in particular is a very information-intensive type of business. So that's why as we scale up, like living with all the data with information becomes important, and we have done it in the past. So it's not the first time when you put it in that context.
So, Nick, could you talk to us about an occasion where there's some pattern in the data that is unexpected that gives rise to a policy change? Stories like that.
That's so.
Something revealed.
Well, I don't know. No, so we actually don't do that. I haven't really done that stuff. We have done a fair amount of work collecting data in order to advocate for policy change. In New York City, we did it around illegal parking and getting the city to change the policies on how they issue parking permits.
That's a good victorious.
It's a great story, actually, but not really a big data story. I wish if Francis was still here, I'm sure there's an example from public transit and routing and whatnot. I don't know, Chris, are you guys doing anything differently? On what?
Unemployment checks. So if they knew where the unemployment checks were going, that they would have a better ability to actually respond faster.
That's amazing.
And there's a lot of stuff that's being, like looking at potential trends, you could do analytics now. Particularly on the public safety, running public safety.
A good example, like the visualization that they did in Colombia not so long ago is the $1 million block. Have you seen that $1 million block? Yeah. So basically they take, like the blocks of the city, and they say, well, a person in this block was in prison, having someone in prison costs a certain amount of money, so we're going to attribute that money to that block. And when they did that, they found that basically a lot of people that have been in prison, they were kind of neighbors, so they were actually, like blocks in which the city was spending millions of dollars to keep the people on a prison on upstate New York. So basically, it was done not by picking a policy, it was an urban planning group, but to indicate sort of, well, maybe if those millions of dollars would be spent elsewhere in those neighborhoods, you could think that the outcome would be different. So maybe there's a better way of reallocating those resources. And that visualization illustrates it very clearly.
Visualizations change minds.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I'm just really interested in that as a discussion that we've had about, people's sensitivity with government released data and particularly certain types of data. Where do you see this being kind of particular areas where, there's still a lot of potential for government to be able to release and make data?
Well, I mean,
like other particular areas, like do you think that cartels would
Yeah, any area where there's not is going to be under pressure to release data soon. One of the great open data stories of the last several years, this guy, Daniel, who was one of the partners of everyblock.com, it's an streaming open data news website. He went around to police departments and planning departments and building permit offices saying, we want a stream of all the data you've ever had, all the issue reports you've ever had and so on, just because it should be free and it should be open. And so I kind of imagine that there are guys like him walking around to every agency in some form asking for data. You've seen the most work in transparency, like campaign finance and like congressional stuff and transit and a few other places. I don't know. I think there's a really, really interesting conversation around healthcare. And education is a really tough one because in lots of cases where the data, it's one thing it's one thing to talk about where the buses are. It's another thing to talk about what the levels of crime are. And if anybody's watched The Wire, you know that you can sort of jury-rig that stuff. And when you get into education, it gets even more gnarly. I don't know. I think healthcare is probably healthcare is complicated too because as the paper you guys read was saying that there's incentives everywhere to keep the data closed. So I don't really have an answer.
You mentioned permitting. What can you do with permitting?
A number of cities release building permit data. So just in a streaming format, every time they issue a building permit, you can see it. So you can pull up on a map and say, "Oh, I didn't realize that this neighborhood is changing in a certain way." Yeah. Right. And think about all the ways you could use that. I mean, just as a resident, curious. Sorry.
A real estate
curiosity.
speculator.
Right. As a real estate speculator. Yeah. Totally.
I want to thank Nick for doing this, which is fantastic.
Thank you.
We should talk about data until the cows come home. So much to learn here. This is just to expose you to the idea that openness and data can change policy and change governance and innovation. I want to call up Khalil first to do innovation. Ready? Set this up, and then Leora is going to be second.
I actually need to leave at 6, so then,
No.
I stayed a little bit longer, but hey, we have to hang out more.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much, I really
Thank you.
appreciate it. I'll be in touch.
Indeed.
Yes, take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. So which one is it? Right there. That would, week 6 is actually better. Go here, week 6, because then we can go right to Leora's after that.
Okay.
Okay, let's go back up. Go back up. All right. We got to do the slideshow. Okay, we're going to do the slideshow. We always have to do this before. 5. Okay.
And then just
Go back.
yeah.
Okay. All right, go.
So I apologize for having to follow him because his graphics are way better, and he's probably much better presenting than I am, but I'm going to do my best at presenting my presentation. So this is Ignite style, so it should move after 15 seconds. So medical education had a boom between the 1960s and 1980s, and this shows what it used to be like for medical students to learn back in those days. And a lot of how medical education is taught still hasn't really changed very much. However, I have 30 seconds. Until 2006, when 3 new medical schools were created, and Florida International University was one of those receiving universities. I was the second employee hired, and I was also the interim director for information technology, helping put in place the initial technological frameworks. As you can see, our medical school was created with a focus on the community. So you've got this bag, and it shows the city of Miami, and we were actually going to embed our students into the community, working with indigent populations. And so medical education has normally evolved from textbooks. So what does that normally mean? You have cadavers, you go in, you dissect the cadavers, you have textbooks, and there's lots of memorization. You basically look at data, you look at the information, and you regurgitate it. However, one of the things we tried to do was come up with a new way of how students would try and learn. So we talked about digital simulations, we talked about the ability to view a body from a 3D spatial perspective, and we also use pro-sections. So you just order 40 body parts and just have them all take a look at it. And I also didn't use those images. of actual body parts. So traditional education is taught on a progressive 4-year curriculum, where as you pass each year, you never actually look back. And you pretty much study alone. A very lonely clipboard. So now you think about a curriculum that's actually horizontal and vertical, where learning is constantly reinforced. And also, you do this in groups, small groups of 5 to 8 students for a shared experiential learning process. I designed this. So I designed the following classroom. It's a typical large lecture hall. It fits about 120 students. And what's so special about it? Actually, nothing. It just looks snazzy. Come on, let's go. Okay, so now, what's special about this room is that it's multi-purpose, which was a big fight for me because the room has a small group table for breakouts. It has a simulated patient screening area. This is a huge turf battle because everybody in medical school really wants their own territory. And so, I'm already here. Okay, so now we're talking about challenges. So we started planning in January of 2007, and we actually opened our doors for our medical school in August 2009. That's a short time frame, and a lot of shared planning and a pipeline was needed to be successful. Our funding ramped up very slowly. We had to borrow from the university. We had state funding. And the other medical schools around the state of Florida actually tried to kill us multiple times. Theory versus practice. We hired senior faculty, but they went to medical school in the 1960s. So how do we get them to understand 2010 technology? Introducing them to BlackBerry was a very, very fun project. Faculty training also became a huge issue because they wanted to hold on to textbooks. I'm going to talk about the last couple things, like 15 seconds. Control issues with central IT, territorial turf battles, and I'm done.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Very ignite. Very
And
ignite.
for any HPS student who can guess what his shirt says on the new control.
That's so cool. All right, so Leora, you're next, and I won't mess with this so I don't screw it up. Is there a clicker?
No, actually.
Okay, well then I'll just do that. But okay, I'll just make it. I'll just make it. Okay. So when Americans think about voting, think about something that looks like this: people actually showing up at the polls. But for many Americans, it looks a lot more like this. People sitting at home filling out absentee ballots because either for disability, convenience, distance, and work, they can't make it to the polls on a random Tuesday in November. But what American elections actually look like is this. In 2010, only 45.5% of the electorate actually voted. And for young voters, ages 18 to 29, it looks like this. And for local elections, it can be as low as 10%. So the question is, how do we get that larger? This is Seth. He is less pixelated in real life. And in 2010, he was a student here, and he forgot to fill out his absentee form, voting form, because he was busy. He's not alone. Actually, 66% of college students who didn't vote in the 2010 elections didn't vote because they were busy, they forgot, it didn't fit into their lifestyle, or maybe like that because they were watching Netflix. So his plan was to change his mistake into a solution. TurboVote. TurboVote starts out, the user interaction with TurboVote starts out with a really simple form that you fill out online, and that's the one and only time that you interact with it online. Then you get your voter registration form basically all filled out, sent to you, and you sign it, mail it back in, and then every time there's an election, you get your vote by mail ballot in the mail, check off who you want, sign it, mail it, and lest you forget, they will text you to remind you to send it in. The program is free for university students where TurboVote has a partnership. It started out as a pilot in BU, and then went to Harvard where it's funded by the IOP. It costs up to $1.96 per student who uses it because of postage, basically. And it is expanding this year to Miami-Dade College, which is the largest secondary institution in the United States, and other schools in Florida and across the United States. It works. when they did the pilot, 29% of students who signed up said that they wouldn't have voted without TurboVote. An additional 26% said they wouldn't have registered without TurboVote, and overall 81% said that TurboVote made voting easier. After they expand to universities, the next goal is to work with local agencies and local groups to get funding so that more people are signed up, so that more people vote in local elections, which are the ones that are the least attended, I guess. The questions for TurboVote and the challenges would be, first, the cost. Without partners, it costs money. If any of you wanted to sign up, maybe with a Harvard.edu address, you could game the system, but probably you would have to pay the $1.70 it would cost, which is probably worth it. So the question is, how do they expand past if they don't have the partners? And also, how do you get people to sign up initially if they don't have internet access? Which could be a question if they expand to local places. That's it.
Hey. All right, well, guys, I urge the groups to use this opportunity and the pizza that's outside to get together and talk about your strategy for next week, because you have a lot to do. And also, the cool parts of the media lab are below us. This is the more corporate part. And talk if there's a. If Matt or you stay around, find someone to lead you around and show you the rest of the place, because we'll be back. It's really cool. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, cool. Yeah, thank you so much for coming. It is a honor. This class is a big deal.
Yeah.
Everybody
I was trying to make a compliment.
Yeah. No, we're ready. Yes.
I felt bad that I decided to take a picture of Facebook as opposed to like the official photo, but then I felt like he knows that he always makes it. Yeah, sort of. Yeah. One of those officially process. Also, I mean, the like outside part is that's like their great.
Oh. Oh, really?
Want to meet it?
I want to check out.
Check on it. Check on it, team. Check on it, team.
Yeah. Oh, hey.
Nick wants to know what you're up to.
Yeah, tell me what
I'm Diane. I'm trying to do two first year. I'm Leora. We met yesterday.
Yeah, I'm going to check on it, and I'll preempt you my pitch, which is secrets.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for coming.
Preempt you my pitch, which is Wiki database that tracks what government is. So if you go on statute the technology.
It's called the.
I know that you can
Yeah. But that's actually this. College is not just about knowing that stuff, but how you.
Yeah.
You know, like so, like that's I know about right now. I've heard about or apps, talk about your own communities instead of just doing, knowing. I mean, it's for me. I always think sort of keeping them stand.
Yeah. Okay. So where are you guys? What's the talk about? What's the
I think it's just providing information. I think the basic one is just provide information. Right now, yes, and I would say no. I mean, they have much better.
Say it a different way. Not like
so they can have. So
I think it's a very basic level. I mean, but it's something we want to create a challenge pulling together or a system, maybe some sort of things that they have to do to gather information, but in a repetitive way.
The interesting thing about this is
I don't know. And they maybe give some hints on how they can use that information.
We have to find a way to use technology to make
we know.
mistakes.
Yeah, that's what else?
Yeah, let's do it.
So,
we're gonna have like
are you
In my like,
I mean, you get
very
great,
right? So that like every time you did a critique, generally it's like here are these differences or whatever, right? You like wrote down a note and then you got a list. The sort of like cool where like visually see how many.
Oh, that's really interesting. I feel like there's got to be.
The only thing is like
Absolutely. There are two things we're exploring right now in terms of very ways to
That's a great question.
SMS survey that
No. That's true. I listened to that.
So the idea is that
what about
exactly they can do it. I mean, it's like, you know,
I mean, it's just generally good. I don't know.
You can do this.
Or like Mickey Mouse voters.
You can do it, 3 times a year, 4 times a year.
Right. But I mean, at the same time, I mean, I was thinking about
And the
that.
second one was,
the person has a cell phone, you can send a text verification, and then they only get like a point or whatever. If that person responds.
That Kobo toolbox. No, which is
Exactly.
just a
And then also, like, what happens if nobody there? Like, what happens
it's an Android-based surveying.
Exactly.
That kid gets penalized for that.
With bad deeds, right?
Well, what if? You can say, yeah. What about if the students survey?
Like, can kids tablet or something?
Everything synced.
Whoa. And then you get a tablet.
And,
doesn't stream.
Okay, that's like that was something. Like, there was like some, it could be accurate to the paper, but like the big, that like, they're going through an actual list of questions.
Yeah.
That
I mean,
might
it's
help.
really a tool that can do that.
But I mean, even just.
Yeah, actually, it's being developed. It's a very interesting tool. It's really developed in birthday. And now the folks that
assess the literacy of this,
No,
essentially
yeah, because also like you can get literacy.
They could just walk around with, an iPhone. It doesn't need data. If you have data, you can sync with the data.
But like I played with my head 7 times in my life. Like I don't, I'm not literally.
So they develop it that way, but right now it's just very easy to get data.
But like, I mean, I guess to me when I think about it, it's kind of like, what is the technology that everyone wants to have? And again, that's an assumption. I'm going on the assumption that all those kids have cell phones, and I don't even know that.
Right. So well, that might be. That actually might be something that you ask like the youth leader people in DSNI, because they honestly don't. And like you have to like get them and like make sure they're not hanging out with like the cool kids or whatever, but like they're probably not since they're on the DSNI.
I don't know. I think right now, I mean, I was thinking what was something that all these came to mind before, but
we also talked
about anything that incentivizes the city.
Exactly. So distinguish like the leaders who actually live in
and you might be able to. Exactly. The self-pay is like hard. On 93. So
like that guy has to get people on stage. And so like,
I feel how
live around. So that's why
they just take it all.
I don't know. They're like,
yeah. Although sometimes they say sometimes they end up
on a good website
because they don't care.
Yeah.
You have to like be careful. I've seen that happen. Right.
All right.
I have a
good luck.
question for you.
Yeah, sure.
So is there any, like the open data people, I guess, Are you working with people to like get more data? And I don't mean like get from government agencies, but like from data droughts. Like with Citizen Connect, someone checked to see like how many reports there were from the Dudley area, and there were like 2.
Right.
It means like you don't really have the data to work with, and so like how do you? And that seems like the places that would be most, in a lot of ways, most served by it.
Right.
Don't have it.
That aren't, especially when it's crowdsourced.
When it's crowdsourced.
Digitally crowdsourced.
No, but even sometimes when it's not, like traditionally governments have ignored some extent lower income areas.
Yeah. A good question. I don't have a good answer.
Are there like partnerships between? Because it seems like the people who would have the vested interest in getting that data to exist are the open data people.
Yeah, and the open data people is broad. Also,
right, I know.
I mean, so it's like there's
like everyone.
There's
we can walk out if you want.
Yeah, sure. Let's go towards the pizza.
I think I have it. Oh no, it's not. I think they have to be more specific. There are people who are building apps and sell them. There are people who care about programs, Right.